All right, today we are gonna talk about how to analyze Google Ads data using Python. So this should be pretty fun. There's a one prerequisite for this video if you're gonna follow along, and that's to make sure you have Jupyter Lab installed. If you're not sure how to do that, I'm not gonna show you how to do that in this video, but you can find instructions online. It's fairly easy for the most part, but get Jupyter Lab installed. And then you can follow along here, and I'll show you how to do this. So we're going to analyze some data from why is Python useful, first of all. So Python's useful because it's just a lot easier to manipulate data in Python and do some pretty advanced stuff than it is in Excel. Certain things, Excel is great for some really basic stuff, but I can't stand Excel. It's too, the formulas get too crazy. It's a lot to deal with. So if you need to analyze larger data sets, or you need to once you get comfortable with Python, you'll actually be a little bit faster at even some basic stuff in Python. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So once you have Jupyter Lab installed, let's go into your terminal if you're on a Mac. If you're on Windows, you can kind of start it the same way. You'll see instructions for how to do that. I'm going to type Jupyter-Lab. It's going to open up Jupyter Lab. Let's go to my folder. Where I have my notebook. And so what we're going to do with this example is we're going to analyze conversion data from a Google Ads account. So we have this Google Ads account, and once you get into Google Ads, you can see this. If you go to campaigns, I'm viewing all campaigns right now on this account, and I've got this segmented. If you go to segment by conversions, and then I'm going to segment by conversion category, and that's going to segment. If you go to conversion screens in Google Ads, you'll notice all your conversions are grouped under a category. Okay, if that doesn't work and you want to segment them by another thing, you can segment by there's some other options here. There's conversion action. There's not conversion type in here, but you can get that through the API if you use something like Supermetrics. So we're actually going to use Supermetrics as well, and I'll show you how to do that. But the question we want to answer here is on this particular account is, we saw a while back before we took over. Well, here's what happened. What brought this up originally is that we noticed conversions on our important conversion goals were dropping. And we didn't know why. We were trying to figure out what was going on. And so we went back and we looked at total conversions. And if we look at total conversions for this, we can see they've been pretty steady. Now, we took over this account, I don't know when it was, maybe in 2021, somewhere around there. And total conversions have been fairly steady since then. But, when we talked to the client and really looked at the numbers that they were getting through their website, their key conversion is a form submission, we discovered they were down pretty substantially. Not since we took over. Since we took over, they were actually up, but they had been trending down over a long period of time. So how did I figure that out? We went into their website, pulled all their form submissions, did something very similar to what I'm going to show you how to do today, and looked at their form submission trends over a long period of time. Because often, Google Ads is great. The conversion reporting is great if you have it all set up right, and if you know all the conversion actions you're tracking. But if you have multiple conversion actions, this number right here can be a little misleading, right? And that was the case with these guys. Since back in like 2029, their conversions had been on a downward trend. 2019. Their conversions had been on a downward trend, and yet this shows them relatively flat. So something was off there, and we had to figure that out. So exported all the conversion actions from their CMS, or all the form submissions from their CMS. Did something very similar in Python. You can do this in Excel too if you want, but pulled all that conversion data together and analyzed that in a line chart over time to see how many form submissions they were getting each month. And what we found was the form submissions were in fact on a pretty big decline since about 2019, and yet this chart shows them flat. And the reason is because this chart's reporting all conversions that are being tracked by Google Ads, and that may not be your key conversion. So in that case, form submissions were the key conversion, but we are tracking other conversion actions. So if you add in those other conversion actions, things like store visits, I think before we took over, they even had website clicks enabled. There were a bunch of other conversion actions, local directions, clicks to call, things like that were enabled before. And we're sort of muddying we couldn't analyze the data very well because it all looked pretty flat. So one of the things you can do is get into Google Ads and segment your conversions you could do conversion action, and that's going to give us a separate line chart for every single conversion that we're tracking within Google Ads. And I didn't actually want to do that because we had under submit lead form is one of our conversion categories, and under that we had a number of different form submissions that we were tracking. So I didn't want to break those all out separately. I wanted all the form submissions together, right, in order to analyze this data and really get a good picture. So segmenting those by conversion category, you can do that in Google Ads. And that gets you a little bit closer to what I was looking for. We can see over here, other store visits, submit lead form. Submit lead form is that one I care about, right? And you can kind of start to see things were going pretty well back in 2019, and then right around early 2020, things dropped off. Submit lead form dropped off. What we also notice here is that right around 2020, we saw an increase in the red line there, which over here says store visits, right? So we saw forms drop and store visits increase. So that's an interesting clue. That might key us into this. But one of the problems with this chart is we've got all these lines are just down here and they're flat. And it doesn't give us a really good picture of exactly what's going on. So really what I want to look at when I was trying to solve this problem is what do we really care about? What are we trying to analyze? Well, the problem is that, it helps to really state your problem clearly. So the problem that we saw was that form submissions through the website were on a downward trend, okay? But form submissions or total conversion through Google Ads appeared to be pretty good, appeared to be flat, and then increasing after that. So the problem is obviously there's a difference in tracking there. So I need to isolate our form submissions here against not really all the other conversion categories. I don't necessarily care about seeing all these separate. I need to group all those together. So I need to see form submissions and non-forms. And that's really how I want to analyze that data. And then I'd have two really clean charts that would give me a good idea of the trend. Right here, I've got some clues that are giving me some insight into what might be going on. But these lines are all separate, and that's just muddying the data. It's making it hard to analyze. And so we need to get that out of Google Ads, clean it up, and then replot it and see what we get out of that. And that's what we're going to use Python for. So we're going to use a couple tools here. We're going to use Jupyter Lab, which is a Python environment. It's a free Python environment where you can write and execute Python code within Jupyter Lab. The other thing we're going to use here is Supermetrics. So Supermetrics allows us to connect to the Google Ads API and pull data in whatever format we want. Okay, so we're going to do that. Unfortunately, we can't, as far as I know, you can't actually export this data. I don't think I can export all conversion actions. And the format I need these in, I need a column for date. I need a column for total conversions, number of conversions. And then I need another column. I need all that segmented by one of these things: conversion category, conversion action, conversion type, something like that. And then I need to do some additional cleaning on that data to break those out into forms only and non-forms only and group everything like that. So I'm going to show you how we're going to do that. We can jump over here to Google Sheets, and we want to open up Supermetrics. And that's what's kind of cool about Supermetrics. It's going to let us pull that data however we want using anything that's available through the API. In fact, the front end of Google Ads, I don't even think you can get conversion type as a segment, and that might be the one I want. I'm not sure. We're gonna have to try this and figure it out. So we have the Supermetrics sidebar open here, and we're gonna be able to select a data source. So in this case, that's Google Ads. The first time you do this, you'll have to log into your Google Ads account. We need to select the account that this is applicable to. We're trying to get the data for. We need to give it a date range. And I think that date range I had back here was pretty good, going back to about, October 2017-ish. So let's just give it that. We've already got October in there. Let's change that to 2017. And then we want to go through probably just the end. We're in the middle of November right now. We probably just want to go through the end of last month. That should be fine. So October 31st, 2024 is fine. We don't want to compare it to anything. And now we need to select some metrics. So what are the metrics we want? Well, really all we need are conversions. That's really the number I want to plot. And now we need to split them by dimensions. So what dimensions do we need? We need date. We talked about that, right? So if I select date here, that's one of the ones I want. And I also talked about how I want these conversion actions split by either conversion name, conversion category, or conversion type. So we can see here we've got conversion type, category, name. There's name basically, but that's under call assets. So it's possible that you can't even pull conversion name uniquely from the API, and that might be the case. So let's do, I think conversion category was pretty good, and I think that should be able to give me what I'm looking for. So let's try that. And the number of rows I want to fetch, let's say 10,000. So you can you can gut check this and think about how many rows am I probably going to get. Well, we've got data going back to 2017. We're breaking that down by day. So how many days from now back to 2017? That's step one. And then how many different conversion actions do I have? We'll have to multiply those together, or conversion types, or categories, I guess. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 times however many days there were back to 2017, that'd probably be like, what is that, 4 years plus 3 years, 7 years. So just about 7 years times 365 is about 2555 times 8. So that gives us about 20,000 rows. So that's really roughly what we'd expect to pull. So that means we need more than 10,000 rows. So I'm going to set this to 50,000 just so it doesn't cut off our, so it pulls all the data for us. Sort rows, automatic, I don't care too much about that. I don't need any filters. Under options, sometimes you'll check no header row if you already have headers up here, but I don't, so I'm not going to check that. But if you already have headers in your sheet, you can just pull that, or you can check that, and it won't pull the header row. And then data visual. So what format essentially do you want this data in? I just want it in a table of data, right? So we're going to make sure our cell A1 is selected. You want to select whatever cell is the top left of your data set. So if I had headers here, like let's say, I had date, conversion action, or what did we decide it was, category, and then conversions. If I already had those headers in here, I'd want to select A2 to start there. But I don't have headers, so I'm going to select A1, and then I'm going to hit Get Data. And what this is going to do is behind the scenes, it's querying the Google Ads API. It's pulling that data. It's pulling it in the format I want across that date range that I want. And so here it is right here, and we can see there's our dates, there's our conversion category, and there's the number of conversions for that category on that date. Right? And if we scroll, what we should expect to see is that we should expect to see other conversion categories here besides other, because all I'm seeing back here is other. And then we scroll down, we start to see contact, submit lead form, phone call, right? And so that looks pretty good. Let's see how many rows we actually have. Move my face. 5440. So I must have done that math wrong somehow. Well, no, that's not true because we had 8 conversion actions. We probably didn't have that many. Clearly, the only thing that was tracking before, all the way back here, was other. So for a long time, we only had 1 conversion action. So I multiplied that total number of days by 8 since 2017. And so that brought us in higher than we really needed. And then, on some days, even on the most recent days, on some of these days, we might not have any other conversion actions, or some of these conversion categories may not be tracking any conversions. I know at one point we got rid of some of these, so they're not tracking. But still, it's a good idea to sort of gut check that number, do the math yourself, and make sure you're pulling all the rows you need to pull. So we've got all our data here, and next thing we're going to do is just export it. So let's export that to a CSV. That's sort of a native format that Python's going to be able to import. And then we're going to go get our file. And we're just going to drag it into this section here. I might rename this so it's a little bit easier to work with. Call it data.csv. And now we've got our data into Python, and we need to make some changes to it. We need to clean it up so we can analyze it. So it's helpful to think about where are we trying to go with this? What are we trying? What format do we actually need the data in, right? Well, ultimately, I'm trying to plot a line chart showing form conversions versus non-form conversions. Okay. So with that in mind, I essentially need to take all of these conversions. If they include anything besides, I think submit lead form is our category. Yeah, submit lead form are all our forms. Everything else is a non-form. So what that means is when I get this into Python, I can say, all right, if this column is submit lead form, add it to the total for lead forms. If this column is anything other than submit lead form, or does not equal submit lead form, add it to the non-form totals, right? And then we'll end up with 2 totals broken out by date that we can plot on a line chart. All right, so to get started, we're in Jupyter Lab here, and we need to import some packages. So packages in Python are just packages of code, essentially, that's already been written by somebody else that you can import and use that code. Right? So we're going to import 2 packages. One's going to be pandas, which is a really useful package for data analysis and manipulating data and cleaning and doing things to data. The other package we're going to import is matplotlib's pyplot package. So that's going to help us plot these 2 data frames, these 2 pieces of data on a chart. So first, let's import pandas as PD. We'll import matplotlib.pyplot as PLT. And then what we're going to do is create what's called a data frame. So this is pandas. This is using the pandas package. And what a data frame is think of a data frame as like a fancy Excel spreadsheet. So it's all behind the scenes code. It's doing stuff with functions. And so it's not visual like Excel, but it gives us a lot of flexibility to make changes to that data, to clean it up, to do a whole bunch of stuff really quickly, right? So we're going to essentially read the CSV. So the pandas, PD is our pandas package. That's the nickname we've given our pandas package. We're going to use read CSV, and we're going to read our data.csv file that we just put over here. And if you had this in a folder, you'd want to put that folder there. So let's say I had that in a data folder over here, I'd want to reference that like that. But I'm going to reference it as data.csv because it's in the top level with my notebook over here. And then I'm going to print it out. So I'm going to print like an example, like a short and a truncated version of that data frame just to make sure I got it, right? So once we're here, we can hit Shift Enter. And occasionally you'll get an error like this. And so it looks like I spelled pyplot wrong. So it's just pyplot. So let's try it again. There we go. So Shift Enter gives us, now we have the data from that CSV that we just exported. And you can see how it shows the first 4 rows, then a dot, 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 then the last few rows. And we can see we've got a total of 5,439 rows and 3 columns. And that looks like our data. We could go back here to the sheet we exported and see if we want to how many rows we've got. 5,440 minus our header row is 5,439. And that's exactly how many rows we got in the data frame. So that's a little way to QA that. All right, so now we have essentially this data in our variable called df. Okay, and it's functioning as a data frame, which means it's got a bunch of power, a bunch of functions behind it that we can use to manipulate this data. So the next thing we're going to do is we need to change the date column, column right here. We need to convert this to a date time object, right? And that's going to allow Python to sort of recognize that as a date, and then we can use that to resample our data. So we need to convert that to a datetime object. So the way we do that is pd.toDateTime. And then what are we converting to datetime? It's our data frame object, and specifically the column date. So we start the function, or we start the function parameters using regular quotes, or sorry, regular curly braces, or regular parentheses. And then we put df because that's our data frame. And then we reference the date column of the data frame using square brackets and quotes. And you could use single or double quotes, it doesn't matter. So now we've got that. And let's print it out again just to make sure that worked. Okay, so we should see the exact same thing. What you're going to see is pretty much the exact same thing. You're not going to see any changes. But we didn't get any error messages, and that's kind of what we're looking for. So the next step we need to take is we need to convert the date column into an index. And what that's going to do is right now the index is over here with these numbers. So it's sort of a numbered index, kind of like Excel or Google Sheets uses row numbers. That's our index. We need the date to be the index because we need to resample this data. I don't want this data daily. I'm not trying to plot it daily. I want to smooth out those variations day to day, because those are going to kind of get in the way and make a lot of noise. If you think about it, if you plot this chart daily, we're going to have a lot of fluctuations, right? One day we might have a lot of form submissions, one day we might have very few, and so we need to roll everything up, roll these conversion numbers up to a monthly aggregation, right? So in order to do that, first step is we need to set our index to the date column. And then we're going to say in place equals true. And the reason we're going to do that is that's going to change the index of our data frame to the date column, and it's going to do it in place. Otherwise, we'd have to copy this to a new data frame. So we hit enter or shift enter, and nothing's going to happen. We're not going to see anything. So what we could do is, if we wanted, let's just do it on this next cell. So let's do df to print that again. And now notice the difference here. We no longer have these numbered indexes. Now we have the date, and the date is bold, and that's indicating that the date is now the index. And that's exactly what we wanted. All right, so there's a few ways to go about this next step. And what I think I'm going to do here is separate the forms and non-forms into their own data frames, right? And then I'm going to plot those two data frames on a line chart. And the reason I want to do that, I need to get forms and non-forms, right, as two separate lines. That's really what I'm looking for, is two separate lines in the end. Not all those lines that we saw for every single conversion category in Google Ads. I just want to plot forms versus non-forms. And in order to do that, I know that the conversion category name for forms is submit lead form, right? And this might be a little bit different for the way your conversions are set up. They might be a little bit set up a little bit different, so you have to think this through a little bit. But all of my forms are under the conversion category submit lead form. All of my non-forms are under any other conversion category. So what I can do is I can say, let's assign non-forms, or sorry, let's do forms. And we're basically creating a new data frame here. So we want to create that data frame from the old data frame, which was called df. And now, instead of referencing a column like we did above using square brackets, we're going to use a really powerful feature of data frames, of pandas, that allows us to essentially filter the rows in the data frame based on some filter criteria. So we can set that filter criteria within the square brackets here. So instead of referencing a column, I'm going to reference the data frame again, and I'm going to reference the conversion category column of that data frame. And notice I'm not going to close that last square bracket yet. And I'm going to put submit lead form here. So now what we're doing is we're saying take the data frame, but only give me the rows where conversion category equals submit lead form. And then assign that filtered data frame to a new data frame called DF forms. Okay? And then we can hit enter, and then we can hit DF forms, hit shift enter again. And what we should expect to see here is conversion category should be all submit lead form. And that's different from what we had up here, which was all other, right? And that's because the top and the bottom, it looks like, of our data frame was all other. And we can kind of verify that here if we go to the very top. If we go to the very bottom, let's move my face, we can see they're all other. If we go to the very top, we can see they're all other. And all those other conversion categories are somewhere in the middle. See that? Okay, so that's what we expect. We want it to be everything to be submit lead form. So now we need to create another data frame with our non-forms. Okay, so we'll go to we'll call this one DF non-forms, and we'll do the same thing. DF conversion category does not equal. So we'll do an exclamation mark and then an equal sign. That means does not equal submit lead form. And then we're going to print that one out and see what we get. And now we should see only other in there. Okay. And we could do some other error checking to make sure there's no rows in here that contain submit lead form. So now we've got two data frames. Technically we've got three. We've got our original DF that we called DF. We've got a new data frame that we called DF underscore forms. And we've got a third data frame here that we call DF underscore non-forms. So now our forms are separated into DF forms and our non-forms are separated into DF non-forms. So next step is we need to resample this data because we've got this data daily and we need it monthly, right? Because I don't want to see all those big fluctuations and all that noise in the data. I just want to separate it to monthly because I've got a fairly long time frame here. So in order to do that, I need to resample the data frame. And I'm gonna assign that to a new data frame. So we're gonna have another one. We're gonna have two more here, and this one we're gonna call monthly. So this is DF forms monthly, and that's gonna be equal to DF forms dot resample, and then we're gonna do ME, which is kind of a weird way to say monthly. It used to be just M. Used to be M. The new way to do it is ME, which just means monthly, using month end. I think that stands for month end. So we'll do ME and then sum. So what am I telling it? I'm telling it create a new data frame, use the original data frame DF forms, resample the data, which basically means like roll it up, right? Roll the data up, and I want to sum the other columns. So I'm rolling these up to monthly. So basically it's going to group all the days in a given month into one row. And then I want to sum the other columns. So it's going to sum others, which basically just means it's going to concatenate these. So we're going to see other, other, other. So all these rows are going to end up being other, other, other. We're going to see submit lead form multiple times in conversion category. And that's okay. We've already separated them. We don't need to worry about that. But what it's going to do for our conversions number is it's going to sum those up, right? So then we're going to have one row for each month, and it's going to be the sum total of all of the conversions for that month. And that's what we want, okay? So we need to do that. And we're not going to do that just yet. Let's put a couple more lines here in this cell. And we need to reset the index here. Reset index. It's hard to type while I'm talking. So the reason we need to reset the index is because we need to reference this date column. And one of the challenges with an index is you can't reference the column. And we're going to need to do that when we plot this. You can't reference the column of an index. So we need to unassign the date column to the index and have it recreate what it did up here, which is a numbered row indexes, right? So that's what this is going to do for us. And then let's print it out and see, make sure we got what we were expecting. And what we should expect to see here is we're doing df forms. Make sure that's plural forms. And we go up here. So we should see this data frame right here. We should see numbered indexes on the left. We should still see the date column, but the date column should be the end of every month, and that's all that we should see. And then we should see submit lead form multiple times in each row. Like I think it's going to be submit lead form, comma, submit lead form, comma, submit lead form. It's going to just concatenate all those for every single day. And then we should see the conversions column be the sum total of all the conversions that happen in that month. So that's what we kind of expect to see. So let's see if we actually get that. And so 12/31/2018, 1/31/2019, 2/28/2019. So we are seeing the end of the month for each row. We do have our numbered index on the left now, and we do see that it concatenated all the conversion category names. And then our total conversions do look like they were summed. These numbers are much bigger than they were before, right? So there's some more error checking you could do if you want to be super, super sure. But that's some good basic QA on that. So now that we've done that for the forms data frame, we need to do it for the non-forms. So let's do non-forms monthly and do the exact same thing. And this one's going to be df non-forms dot resample me dot sum. And then we'll do df non-forms monthly. We need to reset the index. We'll do it in place. And doing it in place just prevents me from having to do this. Let me show you what I would have to do if I didn't do that. I have to create essentially a new data frame equals df non-forms monthly dot reset index. And I just do it like that. So I would not include the in place equals true. But that would only work if I'm assigning that to a new data frame, right? I don't want to create a new data frame. I just want to reset the index on the existing data frame, and so that's what that in place equals true does. And then I want to print this out, non-forms monthly, and make sure we got what we need. And what do we expect to see? We expect to see numbered index over here. The date we see is no longer bold, it's no longer the index, but we do see the dates. The dates are all the end of the month, as you can see there. We see the conversion category was all catenated together. That's what we expect. And then this conversion column appears to be the sum total of the conversions for that month. So it looks like that worked for what we're trying to do. All right, so the next step is to use matplotlib to plot our actual line charts. So now we have, what did we do here? We took our original data, plotted that was segmented daily, and it had a column for every conversion category. We split those out into two data frames, originally still segmented by date, but now we had all of our non-forms and all of our forms in two different data frames, right? Then we rolled those up to monthly data frames. We resampled those so they were monthly. And so now we have these two different data frames, df non-forms monthly and df forms monthly, that we can use to plot our line charts, and each of those two data frames will be one line in our line chart. So now we need to plot our line chart. And so to do that, if we remember all the way at the top, we imported matplotlib.pyplot as plt. So plt is our variable holding that package. And we can say plt.figure. Let's give it a fig size, 10.6, and you just kind of got to play with this size. I'm actually not totally sure what these do. 10.6 is kind of usually a good size. The default size is pretty small. It's like the size of this data frame. 10.6 is a little bit bigger and a little bit easier to read. but just play with that. You can change those numbers if you decide you want to make it bigger. I believe 10 is the x-axis, sort of the size of it horizontally. 6, I believe, is the height. So we want to do that. Next, we want to do plt.plot. So what we're doing now is we're going to plot the data from both data frames in this figure. So .figure essentially sort of like initializes a figure. And that's just matplotlib's nomenclature for a chart. So we're sort of initializing a chart, and we're telling it the size we want it to be. But we're not actually showing the chart. That's not going to actually show the chart yet. So we need to initialize the chart. And then next we need to plot our data on the chart. After that, we're going to add some labels, a legend, the title, all that kind of stuff. And then the last step, we're going to plot it. Okay, so this technically won't plot it, even though it's called plot. It's a little confusing. DF forms monthly. So the first line is going to be DF forms monthly. And what we need to give it is the x-axis column. What column do we want to use for the x-axis? In this case, we're going to use the date, because I want to plot this, the dates across the x-axis there. So we're going to call that date. Don't close that yet. DF forms monthly. Conversions is the y-axis. So we're plotting date along the x-axis, total conversions along the y-axis. Right, so that's the y-axis. Then we need to give it a label. So we'll call this form conversions. So now we need to plot the other data frame. So DF non-forms monthly date, DF non-forms monthly. Make sure you're typing the right data frame. It's a pretty common mistake. And this one we'll call non-form conversions. All right, so essentially we initialized our figure. We plotted our two data frames into the plot. We essentially added them to the plot. So now we need to add a few other things. We need to add X label. We'll call it date. Y label, we'll call it conversions, because we're plotting date across the x-axis, conversions vertically on the y-axis. We'll give it a title, form and non-form conversions. So that's the title of our whole chart. That's what's going to show up at the top of the chart. Let's give it a legend also, and it's going to do that for us. And then let's give it a grid as well. So if we give it a grid, we'll have grid lines on it. If we don't do this, it'll just be all white. All right, so that's our setup for the chart. And now all we need to do is show the chart, okay? So we're gonna hit Shift-Enter, and there we go. So here's our chart. Form and non-form conversions is our title. We have the legend up here. We have conversions on the y-axis, date on the x-axis, and you can see the major axis markers are all years, but that's fine. You can see the numbers are actually plotted on a monthly basis. And now the picture of what was going on back before, remember when we started this, I described, we were having a problem with this project where form leads through the website were on a downward trend, yet Google Ads appeared to be showing total conversions were pretty flat, right? So I had a theory. I thought I knew what was going on, and so I wanted to plot non-forms versus forms, because forms are what we really care about. That's the closest number to what we were getting through the website, right? When we exported all the forms to the website, that's the number we should be tracking. So I wanted to separate forms and non-forms so I could see, all right, Google Ads is saying my conversions are flat, but something's going on there. And so let's see what that is. And so now when we see what happened, we can see, so orange line is non-forms, blue line is form conversions. So we can see non-forms spiked really quite a bit, but in 2019 they were pretty low. And in 2019, form conversions were substantially higher than non-forms. We were doing about 200, maybe peaked around 280 or so over in mid-2020. And then non-forms were all the way down to 50 or so during that year. But look what happened to non-forms right around this time where we saw forms, when we pulled the data from the website and looked at the forms and plotted those doing a similar approach, we saw the total number of forms on a downward trend, and we saw that downward trend happen right around here. And you can see that it's actually reflected here. So we see that the big drop in form conversions, flattens out pretty low, I mean almost to zero for a while. It did pick back up. I think this is about when we took over. I think we took over the project in like 2023. So this is about when we took over the project. So we saw forms pick back up, but still not quite to where they were before, right? Not quite to where they were before, but pretty close, pretty close. But non-forms substantially higher. I mean, look at how huge an increase, all the way up to 650 or so on the peaks. And so that kind of explains, if we sum these two lines each month, that explains why Google was saying, hey, things were pretty flat, when we were seeing through the website forms were on a downward trend. Okay, so now I know, all right, forms dropped like a rock back in mid-2020, and non-forms took off like crazy just about that same time, maybe a quarter later. So that gives me some theories that I can work with, and I can go back to Google Ads. I can look at the change log. I can look at things that happened and try to think through what might have caused this. And when we did that, what we found out was, this particular client was managing this in-house for a long time, and they had non-forms set up apparently before here, but something happened where they just kind of stopped getting non-form conversions and started getting a pretty decent number of form conversions, and then that really tanked at one point. Non-forms shot up. Whenever you see something like this, it's often an indication that Google is prioritizing the wrong conversion actions. And so that was my theory, and I went back and looked at the timing and the changes and everything like that, and what I found was some of these non-form conversions didn't even exist back then. I don't know what this spike was or what they had, but back then they were not tracking things like store visits. I'm not sure they were tracking phone calls. I don't think they were tracking clicks through to the website. And so right around here, they added those extra conversion actions, okay? And right about that same time, they looked in their Google Ads account and they said, oh wow, our conversions are only $20 a pop. We're averaging $20 a conversion. That's amazing. And so they were using auto bidding, and they went into their conversion settings, and they reduced their CPA target, right? Their CPA target before that, I think it was maybe $100, $150 or something like that. They reduced their CPA target, and they reduced it down to about $20, okay? Well, if you plot these numbers versus their ad spend, right? If we were to create a similar chart showing cost per form conversion based on their ad spend, right? We'd need their total ad spend over time, and then their total number of conversions, and we could use pandas to plot out cost per form submission, not cost per all conversions. And when we did that, we found their actual form conversions were running at like $100 a pop. Okay, so what did they do? Right around mid-2020, they turned on all these other conversion actions. They saw they were working incredibly well. It dropped their average CPA in their account, and they thought, oh, that's great. We're getting cheaper conversions. Let's lower our CPA target. They lowered it to $20, and because their forms cost about $100 a pop, right? And these other conversion actions cost $5, $10, something like that. They effectively told Google, we don't want any forms. And so what did Google start doing? It said, okay, you want to get $20 conversions? I'll give you $20 conversions. But the only conversions I can give you for $20 are non-forms. And that's what it started doing. So that's a great example of where, that CPA target, your budget, lots of different pieces. Primarily, when you're using smart bidding, your CPA target or your ROAS target, if you're doing ROAS bidding, and your budget are really going to determine your costs, determine your bids essentially. And so that's why it's really important to know what the value is and what you're actually paying for your valuable conversions, because in this case they dropped that to $20, but that was way lower than what they were paying per form on average. And so Google basically just said, cool, no more forms. You don't want forms because you told me you want $20 conversions. I've seen that happen so many times I can't even tell you. It's why one of the best approaches is to just decide, at the beginning at least, if you want to keep things simple in Google Ads, decide what your primary conversion action is and just track that, right? You can add those other conversion actions, but you got to remember that can't look at that CPA target in the same way. You have to look at that CPA target for what is the CPA for my valuable conversions and make sure it's allowing you to get enough of those valuable conversions. All right, so that's it, guys. Hopefully that was a good intro to Python, Supermetrics, analyzing data for Google Ads, and I hope you guys can use it.